So I have the great pleasure and honor to welcome our series' third speaker, Mr. Arsalan Suleman, a non-resident fellow at the Institute for Study of Diplomacy. Thank you, Ms. Arsalan, also for making the trek on this snowy morning to join us. Arsalan is a counsel currently at Foley Hoag's International Litigation and Arbitration practice. He's also the former Acting Special Envoy to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the world's second largest international organization after the United Nations. He engaged with the OIC and its member countries on bilateral and multilateral foreign policy issues, establishing partnerships in human rights, countering violent extremism, as well as health, education, entrepreneurship, and science and technology. Arsalan also served in the State Department's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, and was the lead multinational human rights policy advisor on freedom of expression and freedom of religion. In this role, Arsalan drafted several UN resolutions and delivered remarks in various UN fora. Arsalan, you've had a fantastic career and a varied one, even thus far.
Yeah.
So very interested to hear from you.
Thanks for hosting this series. I think it's a great contribution to student life here, and generally, a great opportunity to bring people who've had a chance to have somewhat of a career in this space and give advice to others who are looking to get it.
Straight off the bat, what initially attracted you to diplomacy and foreign policy? And what steps or process led you to follow this career path?
I got really into high school policy debate, and when I was in high school we had some very interesting topics. One topic was about U.S. foreign policy to China, another related to renewable energy. There was a couple of domestic topics as well, but that really got me interested in particular in foreign policy issues, and so that shaped where I went to college. I came to Georgetown School of Foreign Service. I got to take classes with a lot of wonderful professors and really sort of deepen my knowledge and exposure in the field, and do some internships that really got me excited about career opportunities in the field. And I think I was lucky in that I was able to develop some good relationships with professors and others who encouraged me to pursue a career that involved foreign affairs. By the time I finished college, I was leaning towards going to law school, and I had a few very wonderful professors who were career foreign service officers who had reached the rank of ambassador and who really had very inspiring careers, and that was something that I thought was great. But I also liked the idea of career opportunities that didn't involve a full commitment to foreign service, that could allow some back and forth between government and being in government and out of government. And so I ended up going the law school route.
Maybe you could speak a little bit more broadly about sort of how you see yourself and how others see you within the foreign policy world, and maybe touching on what ways, and I underscore the plural here, do you identify, and how do you think that has shaped your approach to your work and how others approach you? Have you felt any additional responsibility, if any?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. I grew up in Louisiana, so I view myself as a New Orleanian, someone from New Orleans. Definitely being American is a big part of my identity, but also I grew up in a South Asian household. My parents are both Pakistani American. They immigrated to the country in the 70s, and I was born and raised in Louisiana, but obviously growing up in a home where you speak a foreign language, where Urdu is spoken, and you have sort of an additional cultural experience in terms of the Pakistani culture that we were exposed to and grew up in and is a part of our lives. That definitely helps to shape your identity. So you've got an American part of your identity, a sort of a local part of your identity, an ethnic part of the identity, sort of a Pakistani American part, also religious. We are Muslim and practicing Muslims, and so that's also an important part of my identity. I was at Georgetown from 1999 to 2003. And of course, a huge moment in American history is the terrorist attacks of September 11th. And I think for most Americans, that event was an event that can be marked as sort of a turning point in many ways. Certainly for the country, that was a huge turning point. Certainly for international relations, it was an extremely significant, important historical turning point. Being a Muslim American at that time, someone who's interested in foreign policy issues, it definitely affected the way that I was viewing myself, my role, the responsibility that I felt that I had to the Muslim American community and communities in the United States. I felt sort of a responsibility of trying to clarify misconceptions about Islam and trying to show that those groups are terrorist groups and they have nothing to do with the religion itself. It influenced me, and that identity of being a Muslim American influenced me. And I also believe it influenced the way that others look at me as well. So, you're seen, or you can be seen, it depends on the person, obviously, but people can view one's religious background and think of that as a sort of positive attribute, that, okay, you have a background that allows you to know this issue better, to be able to better engage with certain audiences. And you have a flip side where people who have certain bigoted views will say, well, you're of that particular background or that particular religion, so why should we trust your opinions or views or recommendations on that issue?
Your work at States Democracy and Human Rights and Labor Bureau or at the OIC, whether some of your identities were actually helpful for you for opening doors and connecting with people. So we know that diplomacy is essentially grounded in empathy and mutual understanding. Was it at all helpful to you in those roles, or complex?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It definitely was extremely helpful. When I was at the State Department, this was 2010 to 2017, so in the early years in particular, one of the initiatives that we were focusing on very intently was issues related to religious freedom, and in particular, efforts by certain countries to justify blasphemy laws and other restrictions on speech critical of religion or deemed insulting of religion. And many of these countries would seek to justify their laws under certain interpretations of international law, but also under certain assertions about religion and religious practice. So as someone who is from that religious tradition and who knows a lot about the religion, it's an asset to be able to respond to that very directly and poke holes in the assertions that are made and expose some of the fallacies behind the points that are being asserted, that someone who perhaps is non-Muslim would not necessarily feel as comfortable pushing back in that way. Or have the background or the knowledge to be able to do that. So that's just one example of how you can, in human rights, in the human rights space, use your understanding and background to your advantage to sort of respond to arguments that certain countries are putting forward on the basis of a particular culture or religion or interpretation of either. For the OIC in particular, the background was extremely helpful. The OIC is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The organization is made up of 57 member states, most of whom are Muslim majority countries. There's some members that are not Muslim majority, but one of the key elements of the organization, as you can tell by the name, is a shared identity or affiliation with Islam, with Muslims or Muslim populations. And so being a Muslim American, it was very helpful in terms of being able to deepen relationships or establish relationships with counterparts at the OIC or amongst the OIC member countries, because there was that shared identity that was a helpful point of commonality.
I'm curious if the foreign affairs communities and perhaps the State Department's approach to a diversive and inclusive workforce has changed over the course of your career, as you've seen it either improved or backslid. And I wonder if there are any policies or programs or initiatives that you've seen that actively support and encourage change.
You know, obviously one pathway of getting in the State Department is the Foreign Service exam and going through that route. But I think what has also been successful in getting candidates from different backgrounds has been some of the fellowship programs that the State Department has. But yeah, I definitely think that there needs to be a focus on promoting diversity among the ranks of our diplomats. And if you don't have that leadership promoting it, you're not going to see the results. I hope that more and more people who do represent the diversity of our country consider careers in not just foreign service, but in foreign affairs generally. And hopefully our leadership can create those pathways that will help them.
Rarely do any of us travel any of our career paths alone, and I was wondering if you might be able to tell us about any of your champions or mentors along the way and how they might have influenced your career. And on the other side of the coin, how have you paid it forward and fostered the next generation yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've had a lot of people help me out along the way at different stages and in different ways. I can look back to my time at Georgetown and remember certain professors who really pushed me to apply for certain programs. I remember the late Francis Winters was a professor of mine on ethics and international affairs, and he really pushed me to apply for graduate fellowships. And I did, and I ended up getting the Mitchell Scholarship. So I did a master's program abroad in Ireland for a year, and I don't think I would have applied for programs like that had he not really encouraged me, which was great. You know, Tony Arendt was a big supporter of mine to apply to law school and to seek a legal career that involved international affairs, and that was very helpful. One of my big mentors and champions was the guy that hired me in the first place to come to the State Department. That was President Obama's first appointed special envoy to the OIC, Rashad Hussain. And so he played a huge role in bringing me in to his team as his deputy initially, and also giving me the flexibility to help manage my career at the State Department. And so the paying it forward part, I've definitely tried, and I'm sure I can do a lot better, but tried to make myself available to people who are interested. At Georgetown, I participated a couple of times in the GU Politics Mentorship Program, which pairs participants up with students. Generally being a resource for people who maybe your colleagues or who are maybe working for you or with you, thinking about them and their own career paths and how you can help empower them in certain ways has been something that I've tried to focus on, and hopefully will continue to do so.
I wonder if you ever feel as though your perspectives or ideas in professional or policy discussions were ever received differently, do you think, because of who you are and where you come from, or were perceived to be by others, rather than the proposals themselves?
So I have come across individuals who can be, or were very dismissive of the opinions of people who that person didn't perceive to be of a certain rank within the department, or who may have taken people's views who are from a certain background with more than just a grain of salt. But on the flip side, you also find people who will recognize that your ideas or your proposals are informed in different ways than they may be approaching that same issue. And so I found as well, people in leadership who have been very attuned to that and very receptive and appreciative of that.
more negative trajectory that you allude to maybe having faced, I wonder what kind of tools or resources even within yourself or from within the institution where you were working you were able to draw upon to manage the situation. Sort of a broader question of what kind of advice you might give to others.
So I had the luck of not having to work directly for someone who would be difficult in terms of that kind of negative response. But I know people who have had to deal with that, and I've had to deal with people like that as well. The frustrating and the interesting thing about the State Department and similar bureaucracies is that they're huge bureaucracies. There are a lot of offices and departments and individuals who play a role in shaping how things ultimately come out. And because of that, it's difficult to fully control and shape the process unless you're higher along in sort of the totem pole of leadership and hierarchy. That challenge also presents an opportunity because you can, and I think frankly you have to, think strategically about how you build internal coalitions to support initiatives that you might be trying to push. And for that, it requires a lot of strategizing. It requires a lot of strategic relationships and sort of careful internal maneuvering and plotting. And so, not plotting in a nefarious sense, but it does require collaboration and coordination. I think finding those pathways or finding those means of collaboration, it can be a challenge. It's a lot of extra work, but I think it's a reality of bureaucratic life. I've only been part of the State Department bureaucracy, but I'm sure that that's the case in other bureaucracies like at DoD and elsewhere.
More broadly, if you might recommend any steps for either state or other foreign policy players to take to improve the culture or opportunities for diverse leaders of all backgrounds to succeed equitably in terms of recruitment, retention, advancement. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to open up to our audience for their questions.
Yeah, no, I think, now in particular, it's been a rough time, I think, at the State Department. There's been a lot of senior leadership who've decided to leave because there have been a lot of positions that have gone unfilled and a lot of sort of policy directions being taken by this administration which have caused problems, and that creates a challenging recruiting environment as well. I felt in the Obama administration there was a lot of energy and excitement for people to go into government. There was a sense that you can be a part of government and you can help bring change, and government's an open place for you. And I feel like that takes effort to build that culture and to build that energy. And I think it's really incumbent upon leadership, both at the very top, but also leadership of the institutions, the departments themselves, to really cultivate that and to put that message out there. Just the level of engagement internally can have on morale within the building, particularly in terms of like the idea that that a certain that a secretary is appreciative of the work coming out of that office or that bureau, and that they know what you're working on and doing, and that it's valued. That has a huge impact on morale, and that affects not only the work that people are putting in on a daily basis, but their willingness to continue with the sacrifice that public service entails. Because it is a big sacrifice. There's an honor and great satisfaction that I received, and I think a lot of other people received from doing public service, from serving in government and being able to give back to your country. But there's also a personal toll, there's also a personal sacrifice that's involved. And I think it's important for political leadership to be aware of that and to understand that and to really support the people who are working and are at the front lines of our defense and our diplomacy.
So thank you so much for
Great.
sharing your time, your perspective, your reflections with us. It's really been very interesting.
Thanks,
for
Carolyn. I
me
appreciate it.
personally, and I know for all of us.
No, I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much.